Welcome to Historic Lullabies. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you've just tucked yourself under the covers, or you're lying still with your mind floating somewhere between waking and sleep, thank you for spending this quiet moment with us tonight. Let's take a slow breath together. In through your nose and out through your mouth. You've made it through the day. And now it's time to set your thoughts down softly. No rush, no pressure. Just a gentle story to keep you company as you drift. Tonight, we're heading far back in time to the sands of ancient Egypt to unravel a question that might sound silly at first, but ends up being oddly mesmerizing. How did people brush their teeth thousands of years ago, without toothbrushes or toothpaste or floss? What did dental care look like in a world where pyramids touched the sky and sand was more common than soap? This is the kind of question that tickles the brain. I hope this story helps you relax, maybe even drift off to sleep before we get to the stranger details. But if it doesn't, well, you might stay up wondering whether Cleopatra ever had morning breath. And if you do stay awake, you'll at least leave with a curious little fact to share over breakfast. Before we float too far into tonight's story, a gentle like or subscribe would mean a lot and helps Historic Lullabies keep growing quietly. And if you're still awake and comfortable, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now, take another deep breath. Feel the weight of the blankets. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. And imagine yourself standing in the warm hush of the Egyptian desert. You hear the wind before you feel it, dry, gentle, brushing across sun-baked stone. The color of everything around you is soft gold, pale clay, and bleached linen. You're surrounded by crumbling walls that once held life and stories and laughter. There's something calming about ruins, isn't there? They've already survived the hardest part, time, and nestled somewhere between the grandeur of tombs and the silence of stone lies the story of a smile. It's not the kind of story we usually tell about ancient Egypt. We talk about gods and pyramids, mummies and magic. But tonight, we begin with something smaller, more human. A tooth, just one. Chipped, worn, and dusty, but still holding on to a sliver of a life once lived. You find it in the jaw of a skull resting deep inside a tomb, not a king's tomb, but that of a temple worker, not famous, not royal, just someone who lived and ate and smiled and chewed a lot of very gritty bread. Because here's something you might not expect. The ancient Egyptians, for all their wisdom and ceremony, had some of the worst dental health in the ancient world. And that wasn't because they didn't care. In fact, they probably cared more than we think. But first, why was it so bad? Well, to understand that, you have to start with their bread. Their daily bread wasn't soft and airy like ours. It was dense, tough, and made with stone-ground grain. That meant tiny bits of sand and grit from the grinding stones made it into nearly every bite. So, every meal became a kind of slow-motion sandblasting. A lifetime of chewing this gritty bread wore down enamel, caused cracks, and eventually left behind abscesses and exposed nerves. And there were no dentists on every corner, no fluoride, no numbing gel, just pain, and maybe a prayer. But did they try to clean their teeth? Oh, yes. That's the part that often surprises people. The ancient Egyptians were surprisingly hygienic. They valued cleanliness, spiritual, physical, and ritual. They bathed often, they shaved their bodies, and yes, they brushed their teeth. Though, their idea of brushing might not be what you're picturing. Imagine holding a slender stick, about the length of your finger. One end is frayed, chewed or pounded until it's soft and fibrous. It's called a chew stick, and it's a distant ancestor of the toothbrush. They would dip the tip in powdered mixtures, part medicine, part ritual, and rub it gently over the teeth and gums. What was in those powders? Well, we'll get to the recipes soon, and they're stranger than you think. But for now, just imagine the feeling. You, standing near the Nile in the early morning light, with bird song in the reeds, rubbing crushed eggshell and burnt herbs onto your teeth with a stick, hoping for freshness, or at least relief. And just like that, the story of a civilization becomes something you can feel, not through battles or monuments, but through something tiny, personal, tangible, like the sand between your toes or between your teeth. And in that spirit, let's keep walking. Let's follow the wind further into this story, past the tombs, through the markets, into the kitchens and temples, and toward the powdery jars and golden tools that people once used to care for their smiles. Let's step softly now into the next part of the journey, because just beyond this moment, a curious blend of ingredients is waiting to be stirred. You're still standing beneath that pale Egyptian sky, the air warm and dry around you, the light golden and sleepy. You notice the quiet crunch under your sandals, tiny grains of sand shifting with each step. You hadn't meant to pay attention to it, but now that you're listening, it's everywhere, underfoot, in the air, in the wind, in the food. It's the same sand that wore away not only the monuments, but the molars. And here, as you drift into the life of a typical ancient Egyptian, you begin to understand something strange. Sand didn't just surround their world, it shaped their mouths. Imagine this. You wake up before dawn in a small mud brick home along the Nile. The sun hasn't yet warmed the world, and the reeds outside whisper with promise. You're hungry, of course you are. Bread is life, and your family, like nearly every other in Egypt, bakes it fresh from emmer wheat, ground by hand using 2 stones. The stones, that's the trick. They're soft, gritty, and wear down over time, and every time the wheat is crushed, those stones leave behind a fine dust, a mineral whisper that makes its way into the dough. The bread is dense, heavy, flat, and chewy. It smells rich and nutty, but as you bite into it, there's an unmistakable crunch, not from seeds, but from the earth itself. You chew slowly, and with each bite, the sand works like a tiny sculptor, carving away at your teeth. Not all at once, not dramatically, but little by little, meal by meal, year by year. Even the wealthier classes, who could afford finer bread, weren't free from it. The process of stone grinding was so deeply woven into daily life that even the nobles dined on grit. Even the pharaoh's smile, dazzling though it may have seemed, likely hid cracks and worn enamel beneath layers of ceremony. And still, they ate. They had to. Bread was sacred. It was nourishment, offering, tradition, and currency. To refuse it would be like refusing the Nile. But the damage added up. Archaeologists examining ancient remains often find severe dental wear in adult skeletons, teeth ground down nearly flat, some with exposed pulp and signs of infection. There are abscesses, bone loss, and in some cases, evidence of tooth loss that must have caused incredible pain. And yet, when you picture ancient Egyptians in your mind, you probably see beauty, golden collars, straight posture, graceful movement. You don't see the wincing, the nights of aching jaws, the quiet moments of chewing on one side only. Maybe that's the strange thing about history. We inherit the images polished for us by time, but tonight, you're walking beside the people themselves, not gods or kings, just people, and they, like you, had their quiet discomforts. You walk past the open-air marketplace now. Smells of dried fish and warm honey mingle in the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a woman grinds flour, humming softly. Her child plays with a reed toy at her feet, already nibbling at a small round of baked dough. You pause, watching, listening. The woman spits into a cloth and wipes the child's mouth, revealing a smile already showing signs of wear, at perhaps 5 or 6 years old. It hits you then. This wasn't just a problem for old age. The process started early and never stopped. But there's something else here. Despite the pain, the inconvenience, the damage, no one gives up the bread. Instead, they adapt, and slowly, they invent. Someone, maybe that very mother, picks up a piece of palm fiber, chews one end, and rubs it over her teeth, maybe to dislodge something, maybe just out of habit, maybe it helps. And just like that, oral care begins, not as science, not as doctrine, but as intuition. You feel the simplicity of it. No brands, no instructions, just the quiet human urge to clean what feels wrong. In time, this small habit becomes a practice. Chew sticks, taken from aromatic woods, begin to appear, and with them, powders. But we're not quite there yet. First, we must linger a little longer in the kitchens and bakeries, where the real erosion begins. You step into the shaded side of a simple bakery. A woman is shaping loaves with calloused hands, dusted in flour. The stones beside her are smooth with centuries of use. As she works, she hums something low and rhythmic, a melody passed down, maybe from her mother. You reach out and brush your fingers over the grinding stones. They feel warm from the sun. And rough, so rough. It's no wonder, really, even today, when researchers try to replicate ancient Egyptian bread using traditional methods. The results are always the same. Delicious, yes, but full of grit. That grainy texture isn't a mistake. It's history. You imagine sitting beside that woman, breaking bread. Maybe you'd laugh, maybe you'd wince, maybe you'd smile, even with sore gums. And in that moment, there would be something shared, a truth that spans centuries. Food feeds the body, but it also wears it down. And our mouths, they carry the cost. But you're not sad, not quite. There's something quietly noble in the way they carried on. No fuss, no complaint. Just another day, another loaf, another small act of resilience. And now, just as the wind stirs the flower in the air, it stirs something in you. A question. If they lived like this every day, what did they do to fight back? What tools did they create? What rituals did they invent? And what odd mixtures did they trust to clean a mouth worn by stone? That's where we're going next. Into the world of powders and potions, part medicine, part mystery. But for now, stay with the smell of fresh bread, the sound of stone against stone, and the softness of that simple, sand-laced smile. You linger a little longer near the grinding stones, still listening to the scrape of flour being sifted, still watching the way dust dances in the afternoon sun. The world here is slow, unhurried. Even the labor seems softened by rhythm, by repetition, by ritual. You can almost feel it in your own hands, as if you too have shaped 1,000 loaves and wiped 1,000 crumbs from smiling faces. But the smile you remember was never without its troubles. Not here, not in this age of stone and sand. So now, you shift, not away from the kitchen, but towards something a little more curious, a little more inventive. The kind of thing that wouldn't make it into royal scrolls or temple murals, but lived on just the same. You step into a quieter space, perhaps just outside the home. There's a low clay bench, a basket of kindling, a few bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, catching the faint scent of Nile breeze. And there it is, resting casually near the edge of a woven mat, a small branch, no bigger than your finger, stripped of bark at one end, the tip splayed outward like a miniature broom. At first glance, you might not think much of it. Just a twig, something to stir the fire, perhaps. But then, you notice the signs of wear, a slight darkening of the fibers, a faint curve where it has been held often, and you realize this is a toothbrush, or the beginning of one. In modern terms, we call them chew sticks. But they weren't designed, not really. They were discovered, gradually, organically, by someone curious enough to experiment. Maybe they had something caught in their teeth. Maybe they liked the taste of the wood. Or maybe, and this seems just as likely, they saw someone else do it and copied the gesture. Like so many things. It began as a feeling, a need, a quiet impulse to care for the body using whatever was nearby. You pick one up, gently, and test the texture between your fingers. The fibers are soft, but not weak, flexible, but not limp. If you press it gently against your teeth and sweep, yes, you can almost imagine it working. Not with the precision of nylon bristles, of course, but with a kind of rustic charm, a little bit of friction, a little bit of freshness. And that's where it gets interesting, because this wasn't just a habit. Over time, it became a practice, a cultural act, something recognizable. Chew sticks made from specific trees, like Salvadora persica, known later as the toothbrush tree, were favored for their fibrous ends and naturally antibacterial properties. Of course, the Egyptians wouldn't have known the word antibacterial, but they knew what felt clean, what tasted better, what left the breath less stale. And so, the humble twig became part of daily life. Some were chewed until the ends frayed, then used to scrub the teeth and gums. Others were dipped in powders, gritty mixtures that helped polish and scour. And sometimes, even bone tools were used, small picks or scrapers, carved from animals, smoothed down over time, more delicate, more deliberate. A different kind of brushing altogether. You think about that for a moment. A family sitting together after a meal, one picks up a branch, another reaches for a bone pick, no mirrors, no water taps, just muscle memory and the slow rhythm of maintenance. There's something oddly elegant about it. Not clinical, but intuitive. Not standardized, but deeply human. And you start to see how this act, simple as it may seem, carried meaning. To brush the teeth was not just about comfort, though certainly that was part of it. It was also about presence, about order, about being clean in the eyes of others, and perhaps the gods. After all, this was a culture that valued appearance deeply, not in the vain sense, but in the sacred. Cleanliness was purity. A fresh body was one prepared for ritual, for ceremony, for death, even. And so, a chewed stick and a handful of powder were more than just tools. They were talismans. They turned ordinary mouths into vessels of grace. You walk now along a narrow path between reed fences. Children are playing nearby. One of them holds a short stick and chews the end absent-mindedly. Not because anyone told them to, but because they've seen it done 100 times. That's how traditions pass, isn't it? Not always with words, but with motions repeated, actions observed. Someone else is kneeling in the corner, preparing a fresh batch of brushing powder. You watch her grind something between two stones. Not grain this time, but herbs and shell fragments and something darker, earthier. She hums softly, and the mixture slowly takes shape. That's what's next, the powder. But here, in this small moment, you rest with the tool, with the branch, with the gesture. Because before there was toothpaste, there was instinct. Before there were dentists, there was the mother, the neighbor, the temple worker, all brushing, all adapting, all chewing down the sticks that soothed their sore gums. And even now, thousands of years later, the chew stick still survives in parts of the world. Not as a novelty, not as a symbol, but as a useful thing, a good idea. And that's the kind of detail that doesn't shout. It doesn't command attention in a museum. It doesn't sparkle like gold or weigh like a sarcophagus. But it lingers, because somewhere in your own mouth, as you remember the way your toothbrush moves every morning, a faint echo stirs, the same motion, the same sweep, shared across millennia. So the next time you reach for your minty paste and plastic bristles, you might just remember the branch, the bone, the humble beginning, and feel a little more connected to the hands that shaped those first. Quiet smiles. Now, let's follow the scent of that fresh powder, because the recipe, as odd as it may seem, holds a few strange surprises of its own. The woman grinding the powder doesn't look up as you approach. Her hands move in a calm, practiced rhythm, stone on stone, circle after circle, as the mixture beneath her grows finer and finer. There's no rush, no chatter, just the soft sound of crushed ingredients whispering into something new. You crouch beside her, close enough to catch the faint scent rising from the bowl. It's not sweet, not floral, but strangely earthy, dry, smoky, with a trace of something sharp, like scorched shell or the memory of fire. This is toothpaste, ancient style. There's no mint, no foam, no squeezable tube, just a little clay bowl, and inside it, a combination of things you wouldn't expect to put in your mouth. The base is chalky white, crushed eggshells, ground down into a fine powder, not just from chicken eggs, but ostrich too, when available. You can picture the process, gathering the shells, drying them in the sun, then pounding them with a stone until they crumble into dust. That dust is rich in calcium, yes, but more importantly, it's gritty, it scrubs, it scours, it polishes what the sand has worn. Next comes something even stranger, bits of pumice, volcanic rock, light and porous, collected from riverbeds or traded from faraway lands. Crushed down. It adds a sharper edge, just enough to smooth, not enough to wound, or at least, that's the idea. Then there's salt, simple, fine, and pure. Salt to cleanse, salt to purify, salt to sting just a little when gums are inflamed. And sometimes, though not always, a pinch of dried herbs, like mint or cinnamon, not for sweetness, but for balance, for warmth, a soft fragrance, a moment of breath. You watch as she sprinkles a bit of this blend onto a flat shard of pottery. Then, with the chewed end of a twig, she dabs the powder and gently brings it to her teeth. The motion is slow, gentle, almost reverent, and suddenly, you understand something deeper. This isn't just hygiene, it's ritual, it's presence, it's care. Not care in the clinical sense. There are no timers, no instructions, just a quiet consistency, a belief that the body deserves tending, that the mouth, the place of breath and voice and offering, must be honored, even in the smallest way. You glance down at your own hands. They feel strangely empty without a brush. But at the same time, there's something comforting in this older way, in the way it returns you to basics. Stick, powder, patience, and time. The mixture may not be pleasant by modern standards. It's dusty, bitter, a little harsh on the gums, but it works in its own way. In fact, many archaeologists who've analyzed remnants of Egyptian toothpaste formulas have admitted something surprising. They were effective, crude, yes, but functional. Some mixtures even included ingredients like crushed ox hooves or burnt bread crusts. Myrrh was common too, not just for its sacred scent, but for its antimicrobial properties. And sometimes even ashes were added, believed to purify the mouth from within. You wonder now, did people look forward to this part of the day? Or was it simply one more task in a long list of daily chores? Hard to say. But when something is done with rhythm, with consistency, it often begins to feel like comfort. And maybe that's what this powder became. A daily grounding, a little reclaiming of control in a world where sand wore everything down, not just buildings and bones, but people too. You look around the small courtyard. A jug of water glints in the corner. Clay jars line the wall. Children chase a goat through the alley, laughing so hard their mouths stretch wide with joy. And for a moment, you see them not as artifacts of a lost world, but as real, vibrant lives, with real, gritty smiles. One man steps into view, older, with deep lines in his face and a stiffness in his jaw. He carries a pouch tied to his belt. From it, he pulls his own little pot of powder and a short, worn stick. He doesn't speak, just sits, quietly, brushing. The motion is almost meditative, and you begin to feel it too, the steady calm that comes from repetition, from knowing that, even in a world full of uncertainty, there are still things you can do, still ways to care. You sit with that thought a while longer. Let it settle in your chest, because the next time you stand before your bathroom mirror, foaming at the mouth like a toothpaste commercial, maybe a part of you will remember this simpler moment, a woman, a bowl, a branch, and a belief that even the humblest rituals matter. You look back toward the stone grinder, where the woman has finished her work. She smiles, a little shy, a little toothless. But there's peace in her expression, not from perfection, but from participation, from being part of something shared. And that, perhaps, is the essence of this chalky mixture. Not its ingredients, but its intention, to restore what the sand has taken, to soothe what the bread has roughened, to begin again each morning with a small, steady gesture. So, take that memory with you. Let it rest beside your pillow tonight. And as the stars begin to blink awake over the Nile, follow the breeze to our next discovery, where teeth weren't just cleaned, but honored, even in death. The air grows still as evening approaches. Somewhere nearby, a clay oven lets off the last of its warmth. You sit quietly now, hands resting on your lap, the scent of crushed herbs still lingering faintly in the breeze. The woman has gone inside, her bowl of powder tucked away, and the courtyard has quieted, save for the occasional footstep or distant bleat of a goat settling down for the night. But you're not done yet, because as strange and tender as ancient oral care was among the living, it didn't stop there. In fact, some of the most elaborate brushing rituals were reserved not for the days of waking breath, but for the journey after death. You rise, slowly, and begin to walk again, your sandals brushing against packed earth, then soft sand. The homes fade behind you. In their place, great stone facades emerge, tombs etched with names, prayers, and painted scenes of the afterlife. The Egyptians, more than perhaps any ancient people, believed in the power of preparation. And that meant preparing every part of the body, not just the heart, not just the soul, but the teeth, the tongue, the lips. You step into the shade of a narrow passageway, walls cool and still. Torches flicker in your imagination, and for a moment, the past breathes beside you. You picture a body being tended to in the embalming room, linen strips, resin, oils, and there, among the tools of preservation, a small stick, a bowl of powder, a piece of linen dipped in aromatic rinse. The embalmers worked with care, yes, but also with purpose. The mouth had to be cleansed, opened, honored. In some cases, the opening of the mouth ceremony was performed, a ritual believed to restore the senses of the deceased in the afterlife, so they might eat, speak, breathe, smile. The gesture wasn't symbolic alone. It was physical, special tools, shaped like small chisels or curved hooks, were pressed to the lips or teeth. Sometimes, food was placed in the mouth afterward, dates, bread, a sip of beer, so the soul could be nourished on the other side. And though it might seem strange to us now, brushing the teeth, or polishing them, even lightly, was part of that process. Not because anyone feared decay, but because the next world was just as real as this one, and no one wanted to enter it unprepared. You pause in front of a simple stone tomb, worn smooth with age. There's no inscription left, just time's touch. But you imagine the person who once lay inside. Not a king, not a priest, maybe a scribe, or a mother, or a dancer, someone with laughter still folded into the corners of their face. Did someone brush her teeth one final time? Did they mix myrrh with powdered salt and rub it gently across her gums? Did they whisper a prayer for freshness, for wholeness, for remembrance? The thought is oddly comforting. Because what is more tender than caring for someone's smile, even when they're no longer smiling? You kneel beside a flat slab of limestone, tracing the edges. The desert wind hums low, as if the stones themselves are whispering stories. And in those stories, you begin to see a pattern. Oral care in ancient Egypt wasn't just practical. It was sacred. It was part of life and death. Ritual and routine. A small act, repeated often, loaded with meaning. You close your eyes and let your mind drift back into the embalming room. It's quiet, cool, and filled with the scent of natron and lotus. There's a tray with tools laid neatly, among them a wooden brush, a linen cloth, a vial of perfumed oil. Hands move with precision, not rushed, not careless. Each tooth, even if broken or worn, receives attention, even if no one will see them again. Because to the Egyptians, the body was not a temporary shell. It was a home for spirit, for memory, for eternity. And a home, no matter how humble, deserved to be kept clean. You stand again and feel the sun easing down behind the western cliffs. The light is softer now. Everything looks warmer, quieter. You walk a little farther and come across a small wall painting, half faded by centuries of heat. It shows a family preparing offerings, bread, beer, flowers, and yes, a small stick tucked beside a bowl. You smile. You know what that is now. It's not just decoration. It's evidence. The ancient Egyptians didn't separate the mystical from the mundane. They found the sacred in daily things. A bowl of powder, a whispered blessing, a final brushing before burial. And maybe that's something we've lost. Or maybe, just maybe, it's still there, waiting in the quiet moments. In the way we brush our teeth each morning, barely awake, eyes still blurry, not realizing we're repeating a ritual that spans 5,000 years. It's not flashy, not profound, but it is lasting. You look up, the stars are beginning to blink in. A soft wind rises, rustling the dried palm leaves above. And somewhere in the darkness, you hear the hush of sand brushing against stone. The dead are quiet, but their habits echo. And as you step gently away from the tombs, leaving the rituals behind, you carry something with you, not just the knowledge of what was done, but the feeling of it, the stillness, the grace, the care. And you wonder now, as the night deepens around you, what did the gods think of dental hygiene? But that's a question for another section. For now, follow the soft glow of torchlight through the temple gates. Because in the next chapter, a golden grin awaits, one worn by a god, whose smile may have held more meaning than any mortal ever dared guess. The temple walls rise around you now, tall and silent, worn smooth by time, but still holding their shape, just barely. You follow a narrow path, your fingers brushing faintly against the stone. Every few steps, you pass a faded carving, a figure with arms raised, or eyes wide, or hands offering lotus and bread. And just ahead, carved high on the temple facade, there's a face, not a human one, not quite, wide cheeks, a round belly, a comical, almost mischievous expression. A tongue pokes out between thick lips, and the corners of the mouth curl slightly upward in a knowing grin. This is Bes, the dwarf god, the protector of households, women, and children. He's not polished like the others, not graceful. He's strange and squat, wild-haired, and often sticking out his tongue. But make no mistake, he matters. Bes is one of the few deities who isn't distant or divine in the traditional sense. He's present, familiar, the kind of god who sits by the cradle and watches over dreams. The kind who laughs, who protects, who startles away illness with noise and dance. And that tongue, that wide grin, it was no accident. It meant life. It meant joy. It meant protection. The Egyptians believed that the body's expressions, its sounds, its movements, even the shape of its mouth, had power. A smile wasn't merely an emotion, it was an act, a ward, a message. So, the mouth, and all that came with it, the teeth, the breath, the tongue, were bound up in more than just conversation or eating. They were part of something larger, spiritual, physical, symbolic. You walk farther into the temple, now guided by soft, imagined torchlight, and find another figure waiting, slender, radiant, eyes lined with kohl. She wears a sun disk and cow horns on her head. This is Hathor, goddess of love, music, beauty, and joy, and her smile is known across countless tomb walls and temple columns. To the ancient Egyptians, Hathor's laughter wasn't only divine, it was protective, healing, restorative. She brought music into labor pains. She turned mourning into comfort. Her joy was a balm for the living and the dead. And so, again, we see the mouth, not as a passive part of the body, but as a site of power. Laughter was sacred. Smiles were healing. Speech was creation. Even the very act of naming something, of speaking its true name aloud, was believed to bring it into being, which means the tongue, the teeth, the breath. They weren't just tools, they were instruments of magic. You pause now before a column wrapped in hieroglyphs. There, beneath the eyes of Ra, are symbols for the mouth, a square, a ripple, a curved line. It's quiet here, but the symbols hum with meaning. You can almost hear the words behind them, whispers from across millennia, shaped by teeth and lips that once moved just like yours. And as you consider all of this, gods who smile, deities who laugh, rituals that cleanse the mouth for the afterlife, something begins to shift. This wasn't a world where teeth were forgotten. They were part of the sacred order. That's not to say everyone had perfect teeth. Far from it. As you've already seen, the bread wore them down. The sand found its way into every meal. But the Egyptians didn't chase perfection. They chased harmony with the gods, with the land, with each other, and harmony, as it turns out, included the body, even its imperfections, a cleaned mouth, a pleasant breath, a fresh smile. These weren't vanities. They were signs of balance, readiness, devotion. You close your eyes and imagine a priest preparing for morning ritual. He bathes, anoints his body with oil, shaves his scalp clean. And before he speaks the sacred words, before he opens his mouth to chant, he brushes his teeth, not for show, not for luxury, but to approach the divine in the right state. Even the act of offering food to the gods required a kind of mirrored cleanliness. The giver must be as presentable as the gift. And in a world where the gods smiled, laughed, and sang, what better way to honor them than with a clean, cared for mouth. You begin to wonder now if this reverence ever reached beyond ritual, if children were taught to brush not just for health, but for grace, if a clean mouth was seen as a form of respect to others, to the self, to the divine. The temple begins to darken behind you as the sun dips lower. Long shadows stretch across the stone floor, casting soft shapes that flicker and fade. And in that quiet hush, you catch a glimmer of something gold. You turn, slowly, and find yourself in front of a burial mask. Not the famous one, not the mask of Tutankhamun, but another, simpler, still glowing with a thin layer of gold leaf. The mouth is closed, serene, but the curve of the lips is unmistakable. It's a smile, delicate, quiet, eternal. You wonder, was this smile shaped by life, by laughter, by ritual brushing, or was it shaped after death, a final gift from the artists, a symbol of peace? You don't know, but the image lingers, because smiles don't leave fossils. They vanish with time, unless someone preserves them, in gold, in paint, in memory. You walk out of the temple now, the air cooler, the wind rising gently. The Nile glimmers in the distance like a ribbon of moonlight. And you think of all the gods who watched over mouths, not as a detail, but as a doorway. And maybe that's the most surprising part of all. Not the ingredients in the powder, not the sticks or stones or chewable twigs, but the way they cared. The way they believed that tending to the mouth, however worn, however imperfect, was a way of honoring life itself. So, take that smile with you. Let it rest quietly on your lips. And in the next chapter, we'll explore what happened when that smile turned painful, when joy gave way to ache, and the temples gave way to cries of help in unexpected places. You walk along the temple's edge, its columns slowly dissolving into sand as the path gives way once more to open sky. The wind is cooler now, brushing your face like a sigh. The sun has dipped low, and long shadows stretch like sleepy limbs across the desert. In this softer light, everything feels quieter, closer, as though the past is drawn in beside you to sit and rest. But rest wasn't always easy in ancient Egypt. Not with a mouth full of grit, not with teeth ground down from years of rough bread and sand-laced grain, not with pain that started as a dull throb and slowly bloomed into something that couldn't be ignored. You feel it now, in your imagination, a phantom ache blooming behind your cheekbone, the kind that wakes you in the night and leaves you pacing in circles with no relief in sight. And you wonder, what did they do when brushing and ritual weren't enough, when powder and prayers failed? The answer, like so much in ancient Egypt, leads you back to the temples, but not to the gods of beauty or music this time, to a different kind of deity, one who watched over medicine, healing, and the hidden workings of the human body. His name was Imhotep. Perhaps you've heard of him, not as a myth, but as a real man who became a legend. He was a chancellor, an architect, a priest, and eventually a god. Centuries after his death, Egyptians came to worship him as the patron of medicine, the one who understood bones, fevers, and yes, even toothaches. You picture a small shrine tucked behind a larger temple. Inside, it's simple: a stone altar, a few oil lamps, a small basin of cool water. People come here not for spectacle, but for hope. Some leave offerings, onions, garlic, bits of bread, not just for nourishment, but for their supposed healing power. Others leave notes scratched on pottery shards, appeals for relief, requests for dreams that might bring cures. And here, too, is where medicine and magic overlap. Because ancient Egyptian healing wasn't confined to one realm. It wasn't just herbs and potions. It was words, rituals, and belief. If your tooth hurt, You might go to a WNW, a healer. These weren't dentists in the modern sense. They were more like a blend of herbalist, priest, and wise neighbor. You walk now through the edge of a bustling village, where one such healer might live. The air is thick with the smell of herbs, fenugreek, frankincense, and something more pungent, like crushed garlic. In a small room shaded by woven mats, someone is preparing a remedy, a mortar, a pestle, a handful of dried ingredients, a whisper of prayer, low and steady. The mixture is pressed into a small cloth and folded, a kind of ancient compress. It's placed gently on the side of the cheek, held in place with linen. And then you wait, not because it's guaranteed to work, but because it might. And sometimes that's enough. You think again of the pain, that invisible enemy. The Egyptians gave it form, sometimes treating it like a spirit to be driven out. Some texts refer to the tooth worm, a little creature believed to burrow into the gums and cause pain. Ridiculous, maybe, but also strangely poetic. Because when something hurts and you can't see it, your mind fills the gap with whatever it needs to make sense of it. You picture a priest standing over a sufferer, chanting softly, drawing protective symbols in the air, then applying a paste made of onion, cumin, and beer, or maybe honey, for its sweetness. Yes, but also its antibacterial bite. It wasn't perfect medicine, but it was care, and sometimes that's enough. You step back into the dusty street. A young boy passes by, holding his cheek, lips pursed in discomfort. His mother follows close behind, murmuring something soothing, carrying a jar of oil in one hand and a bunch of herbs in the other. You wonder how many nights like this played out across the centuries, small acts of tenderness against the backdrop of an unforgiving world. No morphine, no antibiotics, just touch, voice, patience, and even in that pain, they sought beauty. They didn't hide the mouth in shame. They painted smiles on walls, sculpted them into statues, gold-leafed them into memory. Even a decayed tooth, pulled too late and causing an infection, might be buried with ceremony, not discarded, but honored, because to lose a tooth was to lose a part of speech, a part of joy, and that mattered. You sit down now beside a low wall, letting the last of the sun warm your back. You imagine your own teeth, the way they've hurt, the way they've healed, and you feel a strange kinship with those who came before. You understand that pain isn't just personal, it's historical, a thread that links us across time and the ways we respond to it. Those are stories worth keeping. So, tonight, you carry that story with you. The story of a people who laughed loudly, ate boldly, and smiled wide, even when it hurt. The story of a boy with a sore jaw, and a mother who wrapped herbs with shaking hands. The story of a God who healed, and a healer who listened. Of a worm that never existed, but still found its way into every myth. And as night deepens, and the stars begin to multiply above you, you lean into the quiet, into the hum of a world that once believed even toothaches could be sacred. Even pain deserved a prayer. In the distance, temple bells ring softly, not to summon, but to soothe. And you turn toward their sound, ready to follow, because next, we'll step into the world of potions and scrolls, of written cures and whispered spells, where the remedy might lie not in the mouth, but in the margins of ancient texts. You rise slowly from the low wall, the last warmth of the day clinging softly to your skin. The stars above begin to shimmer more clearly now, bright and unblinking in the desert sky. Somewhere nearby, a jackal calls once, then falls silent. The night has fully arrived, and with it, the hush of ancient knowledge waiting just beneath the surface. You step toward a smaller building now, low and square, the walls lined with rows of baskets, scrolls, and clay jars. It feels both lived in and sacred. Not quite a home, not quite a temple, something in between. The air inside is cooler, filled with the gentle scent of dried herbs, papyrus dust, and warm oil. This is the healer's space, the place where potions are brewed and words are weighted carefully, like gold. You run your hand over the edge of a wooden table, its surface stained with time and use. Beside it rests a scroll, unfurled just enough to reveal a block of neat, deliberate hieratic script, the kind used not for decoration, but for instruction. This is a medical text, a papyri of remedies, copied carefully from one scribe to the next, passed down not only for learning, but for hope. You lean closer and begin to read, or rather, to imagine reading. If the tooth aches in a man's mouth, the script begins. You shall pound onion, sycamore, fig, and beer into a paste. Apply to the cheek, speak the words 3 times, then sleep with the head turned eastward. It's part potion, part ritual, part poetry, and it's one of many Egyptian medical papyri, like the famous Ebers papyrus, are filled with these strange and beautiful recipes, a mixture of plant science, superstition, and something deeply human. Some ingredients are familiar even now: mint for freshness, myrrh for antiseptic strength, honey for healing. Others are more surprising: lizard's blood, powdered donkey teeth, even mouse tails. You smile softly, not from mockery, but from recognition. Because these strange ingredients, as bizarre as they sound to us, came from a place of sincerity, of effort, of trying. When pain takes root in the body, the mind grows hungry for anything that might offer peace. And so, they tried it all. You glance toward a tall jar in the corner of the room. Its lid is sealed with wax, but the faintest smell of vinegar and herbs rises from it. Perhaps it holds an ancient mouth rinse, something sharp and bitter to kill infection or mask the scent of rot. You imagine a priest or healer dipping a cloth into it, wringing it out carefully, then pressing it against the side of someone's swollen face. A ritual of tenderness, a gesture of care, no anesthesia, no surgery, just touch, scent, hope, and words. Always the words. Because healing in ancient Egypt was not just physical, it was spoken, chanted, called into being. You find another scroll nearby, smaller, worn at the edges. Its script is less formal, more like a letter, a spell, perhaps a charm against decay. It reads, "O you worm who gnaws the bone, depart with the dawn. Leave the tooth in peace, for Ra watches now." There's a rhythm to it, a lullaby for the aching. Not medicine, perhaps, in the modern sense, but comfort, a bridge between pain and belief. You close your eyes and imagine someone reciting that spell, low and steady, beside a child unable to sleep from the throbbing in his jaw. Maybe it didn't stop the pain, but maybe it softened it, just enough. And maybe that was the point. You step deeper into the room, running your hand along shelves filled with bundles wrapped in linen, dried leaves, tiny roots, a jar of something black and sticky, likely pitch or resin. Everything in here has been gathered with care, nothing wasted. You imagine the process, collecting at dawn, drying in the shade, grinding in the cool hours of evening, every part with purpose, even if that purpose was half belief, half trial. And yet, for all the guesswork, for all the mystery, some of their potions did work. Honey, for instance, now known to fight bacteria, was used generously, not just for wounds, but for sore throats, inflamed gums, and irritated teeth. Salt, too, vinegar, even certain clays. Their logic wasn't so far off. It just wore different clothes. You notice a small stool tucked in the corner, worn smooth by countless visitors. You sit for a moment, and as you do, The world softens around you. The lamplight flickers. The silence deepens. And you begin to feel something settle inside. A quiet respect for these people who lived so long ago, and yet who shared your same desires. To eat without pain, to speak without flinching, to smile without shame. Even their gods seem to understand. In temple carvings, healing deities often hold not thunderbolts, but small flasks and lotus wands, delicate things meant to soothe, not strike. They weren't just rulers of the sick, they were guardians of comfort. And maybe, when someone found a remedy that worked, even just a little, they passed it on, not with ceremony, but with trust. Here, they might say, try this, it helped me. And suddenly, a tradition is born, you rise again and move toward the doorway. The air outside is cooler now, the stars above more vivid, as if the sky itself has drawn a little closer. You feel a new kind of warmth, not from the sun, but from understanding, from walking quietly through a world that felt its pain and still kept going. You think of all the hands that stirred those pots, whispered those spells, tended to aching mouths without ever once thinking they were doing anything extraordinary. But they were healing, in the only ways they knew how. And so, as the desert wind returns to wrap around you like a soft shawl, you turn toward the next path, where care becomes craft and healing becomes profession. Because ahead, in the flickering shadow of tombs and temples, a new figure waits to greet you. The earliest known dentist, the tooth carver of Egypt, and the quiet beginnings of a profession born not from fame, but from necessity. You walk on beneath the desert stars, the air crisp now, almost cool. The stillness wraps around you like linen, not tight, but protective. Everything feels hushed, not from fear, but from reverence. You are moving closer to something, not sacred exactly, but quietly important. The kind of importance built from repetition, from service, from skill passed hand to hand. Ahead lies a small stone building, low to the ground and half sunk with age. Not a temple, not a tomb, something in between, modest, private, a place where healing happened behind closed doors, where pain came in and relief, if not always cure, sometimes followed. This is where you meet the Sebwand who worked with teeth. The word is old and soft, like a breath pressed through cloth. Su Nu. It was used for healers in general, but a few of these early professionals, tucked between the lines of inscriptions and titles, were known for something specific: tooth carvers. You imagine stepping inside. There are no drills here, no reclining chairs or bright lights, just a woven mat, a stool, and tools laid out with care on a polished stone slab. The man who greets you isn't dressed in white. He wears linen, like everyone else, plain, clean, wrapped tight around his body in careful folds. His hands are steady, stained faintly with resin. His eyes carry a kind of quiet focus that tells you this isn't guesswork. It's craft. He doesn't promise miracles, but he listens. And that, in this time and place, already matters. You look down at the tools, slivers of copper shaped into thin picks, blunt blades worn smooth, tweezers, and tiny spoons. Nothing gleams. Nothing is sharp in the way we think of sharp, but there's a precision to them, the kind that comes not from the tool itself, but from the one who uses it. You sit, not in fear, but with a strange sense of curiosity, and imagine the process. There's no anesthesia, no numbing. What you get instead is oil, warmed gently and rubbed along the cheek. Maybe a prayer muttered under breath. Maybe a small reed pipe played nearby to distract the mind. Maybe nothing at all. If your tooth is loose, he may remove it. If it's infected, he might press herbs along the gum and advise fasting for a day. If it's cracked, He may file it smooth, using sand and linen until it no longer cuts your tongue. And if nothing more can be done, he will clean what's left, offer you a rinse, and help you stand, not with triumph, but with dignity. You look to the walls now and notice something curious. A carving, shallow and half erased by time, showing a figure hunched over another, hands near the mouth. There's no pain in the image, no drama, just care. And maybe that's what this place really is. Not a clinic, not a shrine, but a space for care. A space where pain is met not with panic, but with presence. Outside, the wind picks up a little, brushing sand against the doorframe. You step out again, into the night, and reflect on what you've seen. What it meant to be a healer in a time without modern tools, without textbooks, just hands, eyes, memory, trust. Not everyone trusted these early dentists. Of course, some preferred charms and prayers alone. Some feared the tools, feared the pain, feared what it might mean to lose even one tooth. Because in a world where food was hard and speech was sacred, every tooth mattered. And yet, the tooth carvers kept carving. Quietly, carefully. They weren't gods, but they were needed. And sometimes, they were honored. In the ancient tomb of a man named Hesi-Ra, a title is carved beside his name, Chief of Dentists and Physicians. He lived around 2600 BCE, under the reign of Pharaoh Djoser. His tomb lies in Saqqara, among the oldest step pyramids of Egypt. And though the full details of his work are lost to time, the title remains. A whisper, carved in stone. You pause now and let that sink in. The world remembers its kings, its generals, its priests. But here, tucked between the cracks of history, is a man remembered for healing teeth. That says something, doesn't it? Not just about him, but about all those whose work happens in the background, in quiet rooms, with careful hands. You look up. The stars have shifted, drifting slowly across the sky. The constellations are different now than they were then, but only just. You wonder if Hesi-Ra looked up at these same stars after a long day of tending to sore mouths and swollen gums. If he wondered whether his work would matter, if he knew that, thousands of years later, someone would whisper his name. You smile now, not because your teeth are perfect, but because they've brought you here, through bread and sand, through powders and potions, through gods and scrolls and tiny copper tools. They've carried you through time. And in the next stretch of this journey, we'll follow them farther still, into the jaws of the dead, where even in silence, their teeth continue to speak. Because hidden inside the tombs of Egypt, beneath golden masks and linen wrappings, lie stories etched not in ink, but in enamel. Stories of decay, of wear, of care, and, strangely, of life. The wind shifts again as you walk toward the edge of the desert, where memory sinks into stone. Behind you lie the places of healing, the homes, the temples, the rooms of potions and prayers. But now, you're heading deeper, into silence, into the places where mouths no longer speak, and yet, still manage to tell us something. You cross a low ridge, your sandals brushing through pale, powdery sand. Ahead lies a cluster of tombs, not grand pyramids or glittering sarcophagi, but smaller chambers, some half buried, others cracked open by time. No guards, no torches, just stillness. And beneath that stillness, something waiting. You step inside one of the tombs, the air dry and unmoving, scented faintly with dust, linen, and the sweet sharpness of old resin. There, resting in a stone coffin under layers of faded wrapping, is a skull. You pause, not in fear, but in reverence. It's easy to forget, sometimes, that every mummy was once someone with a voice, a laugh, a hunger, a smile. And here, where the body has long been stilled, the teeth remain. They don't gleam, they don't sparkle, but they endure. You lean in, careful not to disturb anything. What you see is both expected and unsettling. Teeth worn nearly flat, ridged like sandblasted stone. In some places, they're cracked, chipped, or hollowed out from the center. A few are missing altogether, lost long before death. The jawbone has receded in places, the gums long gone, the roots exposed. This, you realize, was common. In fact, it was nearly universal. When modern scientists began examining ancient Egyptian remains more closely, especially mummified skulls and jaws, they found a pattern, not just of tooth loss, but of extreme wear. Teeth filed down by years of chewing gritty bread and drinking from water vessels filled with silt. Teeth bearing the scars of a life lived on hard food, in a hard climate. And not only in old age, many young adults, even teenagers, showed signs of dental erosion, severe enough to cause constant pain. You close your eyes and picture it. A young woman at her daily chores, her smile quick and bright, but her molars aching, an old man resting on a mat, his jaw swollen, chewing only with one side, a priestess pressing a poultice to her face before chanting the morning liturgy, pain woven so deeply into the background of life that it became almost normal. And yet, they endured. Because what else could they do? You walk slowly along the wall of the tomb, where faint painted scenes still cling to the plaster. A family feast, a singer with a harp, a dancer mid-step, her head thrown back in laughter. And it strikes you, no one ever paints the pain. The smiles in these murals are full and effortless, but the reality behind them? Worn enamel, cracked incisors, inflamed gums, and still, they sang. Still, they laughed. Still, they smiled. You step into the next chamber, where a different mummy rests, this one more intact. A light catches on the edge of the face, revealing a mouth slightly ajar. And there, tucked behind the teeth, is something unexpected. A small clump of cloth, linen soaked in resin, perhaps placed as part of a ritual. Or maybe, and this isn't unheard of, to cover a cavity or replace a lost tooth, giving the deceased a more complete appearance in the afterlife. The idea moves you, that someone, centuries ago, cared enough to hide a flaw that would never be seen by living eyes, to preserve not just dignity, but the illusion of comfort. And you begin to wonder, how many other secrets lie hidden in mouths like this? Not just in what they lack, but in what they hold. Because teeth are storytellers. They record what you eat, what you drink, how you chew, how long you live. They hold memories, not in feelings, but in form. A diet of soft fruits will leave one kind of wear. A lifetime of stone-ground grain, another entirely. And in this way, even the voiceless speak. You step out into the moonlight again, blinking at its brightness. The night is deep now, and the stars wheel slowly overhead. You walk a little farther, toward a small open trench where archaeologists once worked. You kneel beside a scattered jawbone, the teeth still rooted tight. This one, strangely, shows signs of care, not modern dentistry, no, but smoothing, filing, perhaps even an attempt at early dental work. You feel a shiver, not of fear, but of recognition. Someone tried to help, maybe not with success, but with intent. And isn't that what matters? You stand once more, brushing sand from your hands, and look out across the burial grounds. Thousands, tens of thousands might have people once lived here, worked here, laughed here, and lay down to rest here. Their names are mostly lost, but their teeth remain. Their smiles, flawed and fragile, are still here. And in the end, maybe that's what makes this part of the story so human. Not the grandeur of pyramids, not the riches of pharaohs, but this, a cracked molar, a worn incisor, a mouth full of mystery and meaning. You take a long breath, the desert cool now in your lungs, and you wonder if someone looked at your own teeth centuries from now, what would they learn? Would they see pain, strength, joy? Would they know what you ate, how you lived, how often you laughed? It's a funny thought, and a strangely comforting one, because no matter how advanced we become, no matter what technologies we invent, the story always returns here, to the body, to the breath, to the bone. And next, we'll follow that story to one of its most unexpected twists. Because in a land where ritual ruled everything, the toothbrush wasn't always made of twigs. Sometimes it was made of gold. You leave the trench behind, walking softly through the quiet burial grounds, your footsteps muffled by centuries of sand. The stars remain your only companions now, their light cool and delicate as it slips across the dunes. The air is so still you can hear your own breath, the rise and fall of it, the rhythm of being alive in a place where so many once were and no longer are. But not everything from the past has vanished. Some stories cling, not to scrolls or monuments, but to the imagination. And one name, more than most, refuses to fade: Cleopatra. You say it softly to yourself as you walk: Cleopatra, a name that arrives already scented with perfume and mystery. The last pharaoh, the great seductress, the queen who spoke 9 languages and wore pearls in her wine. But tonight, the question isn't about her lovers, her wars, or her legendary death. Tonight, you're wondering something smaller, something oddly intimate. Did Cleopatra floss? You smile at the absurdity of it, but the question lingers, because for all her grandeur, Cleopatra lived in a real body. She had skin that wrinkled, hair that tangled, and yes, teeth that needed care. And if she lived in a world that valued oral hygiene so highly, surely she had a routine. Surely someone like her didn't ignore the power of a perfect smile. You imagine her now, preparing for an audience, not with Antony or Caesar, but with her own court, her priests, her scribes, her attendants. She wakes early, bathes in rose water, applies kohl to her eyes with a steady hand, and before she speaks a single word, before she steps into her role as ruler, she tends to her mouth. Perhaps she uses a twig from the Salvadora tree, chewed to a soft fan. Perhaps she dips it in a special powder, one mixed only for her by servants trained in the arts of fragrance and purification. Perhaps she uses a reed, thin and flexible, to work between her teeth. Not quite floss, not quite a toothpick, but something in between. It would make sense. Even now, reeds have been used across cultures as primitive interdental tools. You picture it clearly. Cleopatra reclining on a cushioned bench, a servant nearby, carefully threading a reed between her molars as she sips cool wine. Not a chore, a ritual, a part of becoming regal. Because the Queen of Egypt did not simply rule with her mind. She ruled with her presence, with her poise, with her voice. And her voice began in her mouth, the same place where the bread was chewed, where words were shaped, where breath met sound. And so, it had to be perfect. You pass another stretch of sand now, where faint ruins cling to the earth like memories. A palace once stood here, maybe hers. You imagine its courtyards filled with citrus trees, the air thick with orange blossoms, the walls echoing with laughter and music. But behind those echoes, you begin to sense something else: discipline. Cleopatra was not frivolous. She was clever, strategic. If dental hygiene was part of Egyptian custom, and by her time it had been for thousands of years, she would have honored it, improved it, elevated it. She might have employed healers, physicians, even cosmetic specialists, not just to treat illness, but to maintain the illusion of ease. That's what power often is: effort, concealed. You pause near a cluster of stones where a servant might once have sat, mixing powders or sharpening a twig, and you think again about what oral care looked like in a royal context. Did Cleopatra's attendants carry gold tools? Perhaps. Artisans of the time were certainly capable of crafting dental implements from metal. Small hooks, scoops, even tweezers, finely made, personalized, ornate. Not unlike floss picks today, if they were fit for a queen. And what of her toothpaste? Surely she didn't use the same gritty blend as the common folk. Maybe hers was filtered, the pumice sifted more finely, the eggshell burned to a more delicate ash. Maybe it included imported resins, or rare herbs from Nubia or India. A whisper of clove, a dash of cardamom, something sharp, something memorable. You can almost smell it now, not sweet, but unmistakable. A scent that lingered after she spoke. And perhaps that's the point. Cleopatra understood the power of a first impression. A clean mouth wasn't vanity, it was strategy. You glance up at the sky again. The moon is rising now, throwing everything into soft silver. And with it comes a thought, gentle and a little bittersweet. For all her beauty, intelligence, and political skill, Cleopatra was human. She worried, she aged, she hurt. And maybe, on certain mornings, her gums ached. Maybe she chewed too much sugar cane and regretted it. Maybe she snapped at a servant to fetch more rinse water. Maybe, in a moment alone, she pressed her tongue against a sore spot and winced. Because even queens have teeth, and even queens get toothaches. You continue walking, the palace ruins fading behind you now. Your thoughts quiet again. But the question, that odd little question, has done its work. It has brought you closer to someone long gone, not through legend, but through routine, not through crowns or conquest, but through care. And that's where the beauty lives, not in the gold, not in the silk, but in the small, private rituals that remind us that every face we've ever painted in glory once brushed their teeth in the dark. And so, as we move onward, let's leave Cleopatra with her secrets, her smile intact, her rituals undisturbed, because next, we'll look not to royalty, but to the land itself, to the ever-present sand that shaped not only the landscape, but the very structure of every Egyptian smile. You leave the imagined courtyards of Cleopatra's palace behind, stepping once more onto open desert ground. The silver moonlight guides you as the sand stretches out in soft, endless waves, like ripples on a sleeping ocean. There's no sound now but the slow hiss of wind moving across the dunes. And beneath that, the hush of time itself, gentle, unbothered, always shifting, and everywhere, sand, under your feet, between your fingers, in your shoes. It's soft, yes, but persistent, clinging, inviting itself into places it has no business being. And so, it was then. The ancient Egyptians lived with sand the way others lived with rain, or snow, or grass. It was background, it was setting, it was constant. But more than that, it was intrusive. It crept into grain, into jars, into clothes, into mouths. And once it got into something, it stayed. You imagine a baker rising before dawn, dragging a heavy basket of grain to the mill. She lifts it high, pours it into the grindstone. The air is still, but the dust swirls anyway. Fine particles of earth floating lazily into lungs, onto skin, into everything, including the grain itself. Even the best mills, carefully carved and lovingly used, wore down with time. The grinding stones chipped and cracked, their powder joining the flour like a secret ingredient, and no one could remove it, not completely, not even the queen. So, the flour became dough, the dough became bread, and the bread, eaten daily by nearly every person in Egypt, became the main culprit in the slow destruction of countless smiles. You step now into a half-preserved bakery, its low walls outlined by moonlight. There's a clay oven built into the far wall, still blackened from fires long gone. Bits of pottery lie in the corners, bowls, scoops, a broken mortar. This was once a busy place, warm, loud, fragrant with yeast and grain. But here's the secret hidden inside that sweetness. Every bite came with a crunch. Not the satisfying snap of a crust, but the nearly invisible grit of sand, small, sharp, unforgiving, every day. Egyptians ate bread as we eat air, with ease, with routine, without question. But their daily sustenance slowly wore down their teeth like wind-smooth stone. Molars flattened, enamel chipped, tiny cracks spidered through once strong crowns. And the people kept chewing, because what else could they do? Bread wasn't optional. It was sacred. It wasn't just food. It was wages. It was offering. It was divine. The gods themselves were offered loaves, and so were the dead, in tomb after tomb. Archaeologists have found piles of bread, some real, hardened into fossilized discs, others sculpted from clay or painted in fresco, because in the next world, you needed to eat too, and bread. Well, it followed you, sand and all. You kneel now beside the old oven and touch the edge of the baking surface. It's worn smooth in the center, where countless loaves once rested. The clay is pitted around the edges, perhaps from years of scraping, of ash, of heat. You press your fingers there and think about the millions of tiny grains that pass through this space. How many of them ended up between someone's teeth? You stand again and brush the sand from your knees. But it stays. Of course it stays. That's the thing about sand. You never quite get rid of it. Not from your skin, not from your hair, not from your food, not even from history. Because sand is more than scenery here. It's sculptor. It shaped the monuments and wore them down again. It preserved the mummies and scratched their bones. It was in the pigments, the perfume, the papyrus, the prayers. And in every meal, it was the silent guest. You wonder now if the Egyptians ever complained about it. Did they curse the grit? Did they simply accept it? Or did they, as they often did, turn it into poetry? Perhaps a scribe once wrote about the way sand found its way into everything, even kisses. Perhaps a lover once whispered, "You taste of dust and dates," and meant it as affection. You laugh quietly to yourself at the thought, because there's a kind of romance in how much they endured. Not with grandeur, but with steadiness. They didn't invent floss. They didn't eliminate cavities. But they kept brushing, kept chewing, kept living, even as the sand wore their teeth down to nubs. You walk out of the bakery ruins, back into the open air. The stars seem brighter now, crowding closer above your head, and still the sand is there, brushing against your ankles, settling into the folds of your clothes. But you don't mind, not now, because it's part of the story, not the dramatic part, not the part anyone paints on walls, but the part that stays. And maybe that's what makes this so fascinating, that a substance as simple as sand could change so much. It fed their gods, it ground their grain, it shaped their teeth, and now, thousands of years later, it shapes how we remember them. You think again of those worn molars and ancient jaws, the cracks that tell stories, the smooth spots that whisper of daily meals and silent prayers. You feel, just for a moment. The crunch between your own teeth, imagined but vivid, and you understand. The toothbrush, the powder, the careful rinses. They weren't about vanity. They were a defense against the inevitable. Not a perfect one, but a noble one. And as we move forward in our journey, we'll step from the practical into the symbolic, to a time and place where even the simplest dental powders took on meanings beyond cleaning, where hygiene met myth, and where tomb dust and toothpaste began to blur. The stars above are steady now, settled deep into the sky like ancient jewels. The sand, ever persistent, slides around your ankles with each step as you move forward, away from the quiet ruins of the bakery and towards something stranger. Because here in ancient Egypt, even the most ordinary things had a way of slipping between the lines of the sacred and the practical, and nowhere was the more curious or more mysterious than in the powders they used to clean their teeth. You pause beneath a cluster of leaning stone pillars, the remains of what may have once been a storehouse or a workshop, long abandoned, long forgotten. But the air still hums with memory. You reach down and scoop up a small handful of sand, letting it sift slowly through your fingers. Dust, powder, grit. It looks like nothing. But if you were an ancient Egyptian, it might be medicine, or ritual, or both. Because here's the thing, the lines between cleaning and consecration weren't always clear. To cleanse the mouth was, yes, a practical gesture. It soothed, it refreshed, it removed the remnants of another rough meal. But it also meant preparing the self to speak, to pray, to offer, to die. And so, over time, the powders used for brushing took on a double life. You imagine yourself inside a home just before sunrise. A woman sits quietly in the courtyard, grinding a mixture in a shallow bowl, not food, not incense, something finer. She's preparing her daily cleansing blend, eggshell, myrrh, maybe a pinch of natron. It will polish her teeth, cool her breath, and prepare her for the day's rituals. She brushes, she rinses, she breathes. Now, imagine her again. Only this time, she's not preparing for breakfast. She's preparing a body for burial. She grinds a similar powder, not to clean the teeth of the dead, although that may happen too, but to purify the body, to pack the spaces between cloth and skin, to fill the hollows, to preserve, to protect. And suddenly, you start to see the connection. What went into the mouth while living also lined the tomb in death. It makes sense, doesn't it? In a culture where life and afterlife mirrored each other so closely, the same substances could serve both purposes, depending only on the context, the moment, the intention behind the touch. You turn slowly now, imagining the work of embalmers, quiet, precise, reverent. They mix resin with crushed minerals. They stir natron with herbs. They dust the body gently, brushing the teeth with something not unlike what a living person might have used that very morning. But here, there is no chewing, no spitting, only stillness and silence. You feel a strange comfort in this, not a fear of death, but a tenderness. Because even here, in the quietest of rituals, the mouth is not forgotten. It is tended, prepared, honored. You walk again, this time into the remains of a small temple courtyard, where the floor is cracked, but the carvings on the walls still whisper their messages. One panel shows a priest offering something to a god, a small bowl held aloft. It could be incense, or food, or powder. Because powder, in this world, had power. Its ingredients weren't random. They were chosen, mixed, and measured with purpose. Crushed frankincense might soothe both gums and spirits. Charcoal could clean the teeth, or mark the eyes. Ashes of burnt bread crusts had dual lives. as abrasive scrubs and as symbolic remnants of offerings. And sometimes, the powders were labeled not just by their components, but by their intentions: to purify the breath, to protect the tongue, to honor the spirit. You picture a small jar now, simple and round, tucked into the corner of a burial chamber. Its contents are fine, white, almost like chalk. It may never be used. Or it may be used in secret by those tending the body in its final hours. The jar is labeled in careful script: a name, a date, a word that could mean cleansing, or offering, or both. You kneel beside this imagined jar and feel the weight of it in your hand, not just as an object, but as a bridge, because that's what these powders became: a bridge between the earthly and the eternal. To brush the teeth wasn't simply to polish the body, it was to prepare the soul, to cleanse the space where breath and voice met, to honor the passage from word to silence, from hunger to peace. And you begin to realize something that hums through everything you've seen: cleanliness in ancient Egypt was never only about health, it was about wholeness. It was a way of showing respect to the self, to the gods, to those you loved and those who had passed. It was how you signaled readiness for the day, for the ritual, for the world beyond. You walk back into the moonlight, cradling that thought like something fragile. The powders they used may seem odd to us now, too rough, too simple, but to them, they were sacred. They held memory, they held magic, they held meaning, and maybe, in some quiet way, so does your own toothbrush, resting by the sink, waiting each morning to help you begin again. Maybe the act of brushing is still a ritual, still a form of self-respect, still a small, daily offering to the life you're about to live. And as the wind lifts again, brushing a fine veil of dust across your path, you smile, because next will follow the laughter. To the tomb walls, the graffiti, the jokes etched in stone by builders and workers, where even bad breath became a punchline, and smiles, however worn, were celebrated with humor and joy. The moon hangs higher now, bathing the sand in a soft, pale glow. Everything looks quieter under its light, as though the world is taking a long, slow breath. You walk without hurry, letting your feet guide you along a narrow ridge until you reach a rise in the earth. At first, it looks like any other mound of rock and dust. But as you draw closer, you see the edges, clean, sharp, carved by hands long gone. You've arrived at the workers' village. It wasn't a palace. It wasn't a temple. But it was alive. This is where the stonecutters lived, the painters, the ones who built tombs for kings but slept on beds of woven reeds. Their homes were small, just a few rooms each, but they were full of chatter, laughter, stories, and very human problems. Toothaches, sore feet, long hours, dry bread. You crouch beside one low wall and run your hand over the sun-baked stone. And there, faintly scratched into the plaster, are lines of graffiti. Some are simple, a name, a joke, a sketch of a cat, but others are full sentences. You read one slowly, smiling to yourself. Kapehu ate so much garlic, the dead rose to complain. It's childish, petty, and perfect, because even in a society of ritual and reverence, there was room for play, for teasing, for calling out the guy with terrible breath. And that, in its own way, is a kind of intimacy. You only joke about garlic breath if you're close enough to smell it. You only write it down if you think someone else will laugh, too. You wander through the village, your steps soft, your thoughts even softer. You think about what oral hygiene meant here, not in the temples, but in the alleyways, not in the tombs, but in the homes of the living. Maybe someone used a frayed twig to freshen up before a date. Maybe someone forgot. Maybe they didn't care. Maybe that's what made the jokes funnier. They were real, relatable. You lean into the doorway of a crumbling house. Inside, a raised clay bed, a hollow where a fire once burned, and a patch of wall with more scribbles. This one shows a figure with a wide open mouth, exaggerated for effect, and another figure pointing at it with what looks like dismay. Above it, a word, biter. You laugh out loud, quietly, but fully, because of course there were biters. Just like today. There were people who chewed too loudly, laughed too hard, forgot to rinse, or left food stuck between their teeth. And they were teased for it, lovingly, annoyingly, like family. You picture a group of workers resting after a long day. One pulls out his chewing stick, cleaning his teeth carefully. Another just flops down, too tired to care. Someone nudges him and says, "If your breath gets any worse, we'll bury you early." And they all laugh, because sometimes laughter is the only luxury left. You step into another room and find a small jar in the corner, still intact. Its lid broken, but its shape whole. Maybe it once held dental powder, or a handful of herbs, or maybe it just held oil. There's no way to know for sure, but what matters more is this. It was there. Someone used it, someone cared, because for all the jokes, the graffiti, the jabs about bad breath and garlic-laced mornings, people still tried, they still brushed, still rinsed, still reached for whatever made them feel clean, even if only for a moment. You sit on a low stone ledge, looking out over the valley where these workers would have watched the sun rise each day before heading to the tombs. They painted gods into eternity, laid gold over the faces of kings, and then returned home to joke about their neighbors' teeth. And that's the beautiful thing. Hygiene here wasn't just about gods and afterlife. It was about community. It was about closeness. You don't write "Kapehu smells like garlic" on a tomb wall. You write it on your friend's house, because he'll see it, because it'll make him groan, because it'll make someone else laugh. And those moments, the shared, silly, slightly rude ones, are part of the full picture. Yes, the Egyptians had powders and brushes and rituals. Yes, they honored the mouth as sacred, but they also lived. They teased each other. They gossiped. They laughed when someone got spinach stuck in their teeth, or worse, forgot and smiled at the wrong moment. And in their humor, you feel something deep and steady, the continuity of being human. You sit a little longer, letting the breeze carry the scent of dry earth and stone, and you wonder what they would have thought of us, with our plastic toothbrushes and minty gels, our vibrating devices and water flossers. Would they have marveled, or would they have laughed? Still brushing, they might say, still worried about garlic breath, and you'd smile and nod, because yes, we are. Still brushing, still rinsing, still laughing, still whispering across time about the things that never really change. The graffiti fades in the moonlight now, but its message remains. You can care deeply and still laugh. You can take pride in your smile and still poke fun at someone else's. And maybe that balance between reverence and humor is what kept their world spinning. As you stand and step back into the sand, you carry their laughter with you. It echoes behind you in the cracks of stone, in the scratch of old walls, in the invisible air between then and now. And ahead, there's more to explore. Because next, we'll shift from humor to beauty, and ask what it meant to look clean, to be seen as pure, to wear whiteness not just on your linen robes, but in your smile. The path curves gently away from the workers' village now, leading you down into a shallow basin where the air feels heavier, cooler, as if the land is holding its breath. You walk slowly, carrying with you the fading echoes of jokes scratched in stone. still smiling from the mischief of the living. But the laughter is quiet now. It dissolves into something more contemplative, something shaped not by humor, but by expectation. Because while ancient Egyptians were clearly capable of poking fun at one another's breath or habits, they also held strong ideas about how a body should be presented, especially in public, in ceremony, or in the company of the divine. Cleanliness wasn't just comfort, it was a sign of order. And in Egypt, order, or ma'at, was everything. Ma'at was balance, harmony, beauty aligned with truth. It governed everything from how the sun crossed the sky to how your hair was worn, how your linen was folded, how your skin was scented, and yes, how your smile appeared. You stop beside the remnants of a small shrine, its once painted walls now pale and worn, but you can still make out the figures, men and women kneeling, presenting offerings, all with the same serene expressions, all with perfect features, symmetrical eyes, graceful hands, straight spines, and, if you look closely, teeth. Teeth that are, of course, white, always white, flawlessly so. You tilt your head and wonder, was that real or ideal? Because as you've seen, the reality was harder, grittier, worn. Most people didn't have the means or the methods and to keep their teeth pristine, but the ideal remained: a clean mouth, a fresh breath, white teeth. These weren't just cosmetic aspirations. They were signs of discipline, of health, of holiness. You sit down on a stone ledge nearby and think about the ingredients used in their daily routines: pumice, natron, burnt eggshells, charcoal, none of them sweet, none of them gentle, but all of them, in one way or another, help to scrub, polish, whiten, and that effort meant something. Even in the poorest homes, people sought to purify themselves, not because someone told them to, but because the culture taught them that to be clean was to be ready, to be worthy, not just of admiration, but of participation. A priest couldn't walk into a temple without cleansing. A woman couldn't attend a ceremony without washing, perfuming, brushing. A servant in the palace might face judgment for unkempt breath, not from cruelty, but from custom. It was simply understood. To show up with a clean mouth was to say, I respect you. I respect myself. I respect the gods. You stand and step back into the moonlight, looking up at its silvery glow. It washes everything in quiet, pale light, softening rough edges, smoothing out imperfections, and you realize whiteness, for the Egyptians, wasn't just about color. It was about purity, reflection, the absence of blemish. Their gods were often depicted with gleaming white robes. Their temples glowed with polished limestone. Their offerings were wrapped in clean linen, and their teeth, in art and ideal, were no exception. Even their language reflected this. The hieroglyph for clean shared symbols with those for bright and beautiful. A clean body was radiant. A clean smile was holy. But this wasn't limited to the elite. You pass another low building, a small family dwelling, likely belonging to artisans. On the wall inside, faded but visible, are marks left by soot and oil lamps, and above the hearth, a tiny painted figure, likely a household deity. It's a domestic space, ordinary in its function. And yet, even here, among simple tools and worn sandals, there is a comb, a small bowl for oil, and a bundle of twigs, bound with twine, chew sticks. It wasn't glamour, it wasn't luxury, it was effort, pride, participation in the culture's shared belief that appearance mattered, not out of vanity, but out of value. You walk again, your feet crunching over fine pebbles as the landscape opens up around you, far off. You can see the flicker of torchlight, perhaps from a nearby temple or an imagined caravan passing in the distance. And with that light, another thought begins to rise. What did people think when their teeth failed them? When whitening powders couldn't fix the damage? When a tooth turned black or fell out? Was it shame, sadness, or something else? You imagine someone, maybe a scribe, maybe a dancer, noticing the slow darkening of a front tooth. It doesn't hurt, but it shows. The powders don't help. She turns away more when speaking, smiles smaller, laughs into her hand. She's not less loved. But something has shifted. In a society where beauty was intertwined with virtue, a fading smile wasn't just a physical change. It was symbolic, emotional. And yet, she still brushes, still prepares her powder, still makes the effort, because effort itself carries beauty, even if the results fall short of perfection. You smile again, because that feels familiar. We do the same, don't we? Whiteness still whispers to us, in ads, in screens, in mirrors. We chase it, not always for health, but for what it means. Confidence, freshness, readiness, belonging, and sometimes, like them. We forget where the line is between hygiene and pressure, between care and comparison. But the Egyptians knew this too. They poked fun at each other. They honored their dead. They brushed every day, with twigs, with powders, with faith, and through all of it, they kept smiling. You turn now toward the ridge ahead, where the sand begins to slope upward once more. The wind has returned, soft, steady, brushing across your cheeks like breath. And as you climb, the moon climbs too, higher and higher, lighting the path ahead. Because next, we'll follow another thread, not of whiteness or vanity, but of curiosity. We'll step outside Egypt, just briefly, and look across the ancient world to see how other civilizations, from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, cared for their teeth. What did they chew? What did they grind? What did they believe a clean mouth meant? And how, despite the distance, they weren't so different, after all. You reach the top of the ridge, wind lifting the edge of your tunic, the world below softened by moonlight. Behind you, Egypt, a land of powder, gods, and dusty bread. Ahead of you, the wide stretch of imagination, reaching toward distant lands where other people, in other places, also woke each morning with mouths to tend and smiles to shape. Because while Egypt may have honored the mouth with golden tools and sacred chants, they weren't the only ones brushing before breakfast. You take a slow breath and look east, across deserts and mountains and winding rivers, toward the lands where the earliest cities stirred to life. Mesopotamia, India, China. You begin with Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates curved through baked clay cities, and the first cuneiform symbols carved the record of human thought. Here, too, hygiene had its place. The Sumerians, clever and observant, recorded remedies for pain in the teeth and gums on clay tablets, soft before firing, sharp with knowledge afterward. Their most curious theory, that a toothworm caused decay. You smile gently at the idea. A worm, squirming in your molar, eating away from the inside. Not true, of course, but not unreasonable either. When pain appears without cause, the mind invents stories. Something had to be responsible, and in the fertile soil of the imagination, worms took root. To combat the worm, Mesopotamians used herbs, resins, and chewed sticks, some soaked in aromatic oils. They rinsed with beer, wine, or vinegar. They offered spells to their gods and whispered words of expulsion to unseen intruders in the mouth. Not unlike Egypt. Different names, different rivers, same instinct. Clean the pain away. Make the mouth whole again. You turn now to the southeast, where the Indus Valley blooms into view, a civilization known for its plumbing, its order, its strange silence in the archaeological record. No kings, no pyramids, but drains, baths, gridded cities, and in homes made of fired brick. People chewed on twigs. Not just any twigs, but ones from neem trees, still used today across India for their antibacterial properties. You imagine a man standing by the threshold of his home, his day just beginning. He selects a fresh twig, bites the end, frays the fibers, and brushes gently. Front teeth, back, gum line. The motion is patient, almost rhythmic. He doesn't speak, he doesn't rush. And when he finishes, he spits to the side and begins his day. Like Egypt, they valued cleanliness as daily ritual. And like Egypt, they didn't separate the mouth from the soul. Even today, in many parts of India, dantan sticks are sold in bundles, wrapped in twine, and chewed with the same care that began thousands of years ago. And what about China? You shift your gaze east once more, across the mountains and rivers, toward a civilization that developed its own systems of medicine. Intricate, layered, holistic. Traditional Chinese medical texts describe the mouth as a mirror of the body, each tooth linked to an organ, each part of the tongue a signal of inner balance or imbalance. To care for the mouth was not isolated. It was part of the body's song. They used green tea rinses, chewed aromatic roots, rubbed crushed salt crystals along the gums. Some ancient formulas included ingredients like ginseng, clove, and honeysuckle, not just for freshness, but for cooling the heat that rose when illness struck. And of course, they invented the bristle toothbrush, using hog hair tied to bamboo handles. Crude by modern standards, but revolutionary. You smile again at the image, a thoughtful scholar brushing with boar's bristles before composing poetry by lantern light, not for vanity, but because order began in the body. A clean mouth opened the way for clean thoughts. You rest now, crouched in the moon-warmed sand, listening to the voices of these cultures rise and blend. Different ingredients, different beliefs, but always the same goal: to feel clean, to show respect, to start again. Mouth fresh, breath clear, smile ready. You notice something else, too, something quieter. In all these places, people use plants, not plastic, not foam, not electric gadgets, just twigs, roots, salt, leaves, oils, the world itself, transformed by hand and habit into something meaningful. And this, perhaps, is the heart of it. Human beings have always reached into the earth for answers, not just for food or shelter, but for care, for comfort, for the daily reassurance that you are ready to face the world, even if your smile is crooked, even if your gums ache, even if the worm refuses to leave. You run your hand across the sand again, now cool under the stars, and feel that these people, from Egypt to China, are no longer strangers. You've met them in their mornings, heard them in their discomfort, watched them rinse, scrub, sigh, and go on, and you realize their tools may be lost, their names may have vanished, but their gestures remain in your own morning routine, in the brush beside your sink, in the way you pause, look into the mirror, and begin again. It's not just hygiene, it's heritage. And so, as the moon begins its slow descent toward the edge of the world, you prepare to rise, too, because next, we'll return to Egypt, to one of the most curious moments in its long dental history, when powders and pastes gave way to something more formal, a final rinse, a symbolic gesture, a farewell cleansing before burial. Let's walk now toward the last mouthful of ritual, where even silence was honored with one last sweep of care. You descend once more into the familiar sands of Egypt, drawn now not by daily life or golden ritual, but by the quiet preparation that came after the last breath. The stars above are beginning to soften at their edges. The night is aging gently, like linen washed smooth by use, and the wind has stilled, as if even the air is waiting. You follow a winding path to the banks of the Nile, where reeds rustle in the darkness and the river glints with secrets. This is where the journey of the dead often began, not in palaces or temples, but by the water, where the body was washed and readied, every gesture a whisper of farewell. But tonight, we look not at the whole, not the oils or the wrappings, not the long chant of the opening of the mouth, but at one final gesture, one small, precise act, the cleansing of the mouth. You arrive at a modest embalming tent. Inside, quiet figures work by flickering torchlight. No crowds, no gold. Just shadows and scent, resin, herbs, a trace of frankincense in the air. The body lies still on a stone table, half wrapped, half bared, as if suspended between two worlds. A priest approaches with a small bowl, not elaborate, not ceremonial, just smooth clay filled with a liquid that glows faintly in the light. A rinse, infused with myrrh. Perhaps a touch of natron. Perhaps even crushed lotus petals, if the family could afford it. This rinse wasn't for swallowing, it wasn't for comfort, it was for completion. The final gesture to a mouth that had once laughed, argued, sung lullabies, whispered prayers, kissed loved ones, and called out to gods. A mouth that had once needed brushing, now tended for the last time. You watch as the priest dips a strip of linen into the rinse, twists it gently, and wipes the lips. Then the teeth, if they remain, careful, steady, soft, not rushed, not skipped. Because in this culture, the mouth was not just a place of speech, it was a portal to live well. You had to speak truth, and to speak truth, your mouth had to be clean. That idea didn't vanish at death. In fact, it only deepened. You remember the opening of the mouth ceremony, performed for pharaohs and commoners alike, a ritual meant to reawaken the senses of the deceased, so they could eat, breathe, and speak in the afterlife. A small curved tool was pressed to the mouth, to the eyes, to the ears, not as magic, but as permission to be whole again. And in that context, this rinse becomes more than a wash. It becomes a blessing, a benediction of breath. You imagine the priest murmuring something low as he works, a final phrase, perhaps, or just silence. There's dignity in it, regardless, and it brings you back, full circle, to the way we started, with a question, a brush, a smile, with the sand caught between teeth and the grind of stone against grain, with pain and care and laughter and powders that blurred the line between medicine and myth. You've followed that path across tombs and markets, through temples and kitchens, across rivers and into the hills beyond Egypt. And now, as the torchlight fades and the final wrap is laid across the body's lips, you realize what this last rinse truly means. It means you mattered, your voice mattered, your smile mattered, your mouth, so easy to take for granted in life, was honored in death. Because the Egyptians believed that to be fully human was to be prepared, not just in body, but in presence. And presence began in the mouth. You step quietly away from the embalming tent, leaving the work to continue behind you. The sun is beginning to think about rising. The sky shifts from blue-black to the softest shade of gray, like a breath held halfway. The Nile sparkles now, touched by the promise of morning. And you reflect, for one last moment, on the care woven into this culture, not through grand declarations, but through daily acts, a stick, a rinse, a pinch of salt, a prayer whispered into the dark. The Egyptians knew the mouth could be dangerous, a place of lies, of rot, of hunger, but it could also be sacred, healing, full of light. So they brushed, and they taught their children to brush, and they passed that habit on through centuries, even as their gods fell silent and their temples crumbled. And we, whether we know it or not, still carry that tradition. Each morning, when you stand before your mirror and lift your brush, you are reenacting a ritual 5,000 years old. Not because you must, but because it feels right, because there is comfort in the rhythm, in the clean start, in the quiet reclaiming of yourself, one stroke at a time. You walk now along the riverbank, the sky above you slowly filling with pale color. The reeds sway. The air is cool and kind, and though this part of the journey is coming to an end, you carry something new with you. Not just facts, not just history, but a closeness. You know these people now, not by their crowns or statues or scrolls, but by their habits, their quirks, their care. And as the first light of dawn brushes the surface of the Nile, you smile, because the weird way ancient Egyptians brushed their teeth wasn't so weird after all. It was just human. You linger a little longer beside the Nile, letting your feet rest in the cool sand, your thoughts trailing like smoke in the soft air. Dawn has fully arrived now, not loud, not blinding, but gentle, the sky blushing with a pale warmth, as if the horizon itself has just woken from a quiet dream. The world around you feels still, not frozen, just softened, as if everything, for just a breath, is remembering something tender, something small, something easy to overlook, a smile, not the wide, performative grin for ceremony or portraiture, not the perfect white line of a royal sculpture, but something more fleeting, more real, the half smile of someone cleaning their teeth with a frayed twig, the amused grin of a priest preparing the final rinse, the self-conscious chuckle of a child being told to swish one more time. These are the smiles that time doesn't record, not in stone, not in scrolls, but they existed. They must have. And somehow, knowing that is enough. You look up toward the ridge where the night began. The slope seems smaller now, like the story has folded gently in on itself. You've been on a long and winding walk, through sandstorms of grit, tombs of golden tools, echoes from distant lands, and the hush of final rituals. And at the heart of it all was a question so simple. It almost seems silly. How did they brush their teeth? But what you've found is something more. That even in ancient Egypt, with its gods and pharaohs, its towering monuments and cosmic beliefs, there were people who paused each morning to scrape the sleep from their mouths, people who crouched over basins, who chewed sticks, who mixed powders, not out of vanity, but out of rhythm, out of care, out of the human impulse to begin again, a little cleaner than before. And somehow, that makes them feel close, closer than the years would suggest. Because you do the same, you, too, begin your day by brushing the night away. By scrubbing, rinsing, wiping the slate, and the smile clean. It's a ritual passed down not through edicts, but through instinct, not shouted, but whispered. And that whisper is what stays with you now. You imagine walking into an ancient home, modest, sunlit, built of mud brick and memory. The walls are warm, the air smells of earth and oil, and somewhere in the corner sits a bundle of twigs, bound in twine, waiting to be picked up and used. There's no ceremony, no music, just the soft sound of bristles on teeth. A rhythm that needs no audience, only intention. You smile again, not because anyone is watching, but because the moment invites it. And in your mind, the image of that smile, half forgotten by history, half preserved by habit, becomes a kind of offering, a quiet reminder that no act of care is ever truly lost, not if it's repeated, not if it's remembered, not if it's shared. You close your eyes and lean back just slightly, listening to the reeds rustle and the water move. The world has shifted into its daytime rhythm now, but for a few final moments, you stay tucked within the softness of what came before. You think of all the strange and lovely details, the ground egg shells, the burnt salt, the bitter myrrh, the laughter scratched into tomb walls, the silence honored in burial, the toothbrushes made of trees, the smiles made of effort, all of it, odd, tender, earthy, woven into a single thread stretching from then to now. You breathe in once more, deep and slow, letting the warm air fill your chest and ease your shoulders. There's no rush, no task waiting, just the gift of stillness. The gift of having walked alongside people from another time and found something utterly familiar. A ritual, a reason, a smile, and so you rise, gently, quietly. The light now folds around your body like linen, soft and clean. The air smells of dust and sun and the last trace of morning dew. And as you take your first step back toward the waking world, you carry with you not just a story, but a feeling. That history isn't just in what people built, it's in what they repeated, and that sometimes the simplest habits, like brushing your teeth, hold the deepest echoes, echoes that shimmer in silence, that travel through time, that rise each morning with the sun and the smile that comes after. Thank you for spending this slow, quiet journey with me. I hope you're already fast asleep, drifting through dreams dusted in myrrh and moonlight. But if you're still here, still awake, still wandering gently with your thoughts, then I hope you found something warm to carry with you. A small truth, a curious comfort, or maybe just a reason to smile